To God be the glory. We are so thankful that you thought it not robbery to be here this afternoon for this historical occasion. And we're not going to put off the starting any longer. We are, however, being broadcast through the Facebook and other electronic means, and so people are joining us beyond this audience. There will be only one change, and I'll introduce you to that later. But on behalf of the officers and members of the Ebenezer Baptist Church, and today more particular, the Edgecombe Nash Political Caucus, we want to thank the officers and members of the Ebenezer Baptist Church for hosting this event. And we want to thank the Edgecombe Nash Political Caucus with his Secretary of Treasurer, Deacon Dennis Huzzy, over to my left. Let's give him a hand for the job he's doing. I would have to be repetitious if I continue to talk about the historical significance of this moment. And I see one person that is on a program, and ask her to please come maybe closer to the front. She know who she is. We only have one female up here, so come a little closer to the front, if you will. We're going to start out with a prayer from the pastor of the Mount Zion First Baptist Church, the most historical Baptist church, really almost in North Carolina. All of the Baptist churches in Edgecombe County, Nash County, grew out of that church, including this one in 1916. As the pastor Erastus Lucas led a group of people here to start this church as an extension of Mount Zion. The Reverend Dr. Nehemiah Smith, who has been actively involved in this community, and he shall come now. Let us stand as he shall lead us in our prayer for the nation.
Let us honor God by bowing our heads in prayer. Father God, it is again that we come to you as humble as we know how. We come to you because the people of this nation and everything in it belong to you. We are not here by accident. You are the one who set us in this nation at this particular time for the glory of your name. But Father, people in this country are turning against each other. We no longer live like brothers and sisters. Brothers have turned against brother and child against parent. But your word says that if we humble ourselves and turn from our wicked ways, you will heal our land. Lord, this evening we thank you for the service, the continued service of Congressman G.K. Butterfield. We thank you for his 17 years of service. We thank you for his time to come to us always, to continue to give us what we need to know in order to make North Carolina, in order to make this nation, in order to make this world better. God, continue to have your hand on him and his life. Continue to bless his family. Continue to bless him from the crown of his head to the soles of his feet. Lord, heal our hearts. God, heal our land. Remove bitterness and resentment from our hearts, and help us to live as brothers and sisters. Help us to be what you would have us to be. In the precious name of Jesus, the one who came to give us life and to give us that life more abundantly, we say amen.
God bless you. We continue to carry on our program The program speaks for itself, but I will be making remarks. But now we have Representative Shelley Willingham. I might just say parenthetically here, when it comes to the Edgecombe-Nash Political Caucus, he is, in many ways, the person that has caused it to come into being. I say in all humility, as we struggled in the late 1970s and also in 1982 in particular, it was Shelley which said, we need a caucus, and here's how it worked. He's coming now to speak to us about the occasion.
Thank you, Reverend Walker. I put some notes down because I was supposed to talk about the occasion, which I will, but I think that there are a number of you you've heard the political caucus, Edgecombe-Nash Political Caucus, but not really knowing what we're all about. Let me just say that the Edgecombe-Nash Political Caucus is a PAC. That's a political action committee, and we are bipartisan. This PAC has been in existence for over 40 years. And why did we come into existence? There were some things that we saw in our community that were lacking. So what we thought, that's Reverend Walker and myself at the time, but there are a lot of folks who were involved in this and who had something to do with it. And if I start calling names, then of course you know what that means. You're going to forget somebody. So I won't do that. But the caucus believes that political education and active participation is the thing that was missing at the time, so we tried to make sure that this is something that came into being. We feel like the goals and the objectives of the caucus at that time, and still is, was to address issues and concerns within our community that are being neglected. And as a foundation of the caucus, of course, it's voter registration and get out to vote. And we believe that all politics are local. We support candidates and causes that advocate for issues and concerns of our community. The Edgecombe-Nash Political Caucus continues to be the driving force for voter registration, voter education, and get out to vote participation. And this is something, as I said, we've done for over 40 years. And we are known around the state, and we have gone to other counties in the state to show them how we did it and what we did. And if I can go back just a little bit, before the Political Action Committee came into operation, we had something called Citizens for a Better Edgecombe County. And I'm sure everyone who was in this area at that time, you were participants. If you were a minister, you were certainly a participant, because we went to every church on a caravan registering people. We registered thousands of people during that time, and we continue to register people. So today, rather than getting into a long, lengthy thing, just to remember that the Edgecombe-Nash Political Caucus is a PAC. As I said, we support candidates and causes that support us. And those are the things that we'll continue to do. So, as I close, the Edgecombe-Nash Political Caucus is proud to begin its 41st year of work with this program. And this is what we do. We bring you information, we bring you people to teach you, because it's all about education, it's all about knowing what's going on, and also making sure that you understand what this process is all about, the political process, and trying to make sure that you are active participant. Because if we don't get out and get involved, then we don't have a voice. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Representative Willingham. I was just noticed what he said to the people that we registered. My memory, and I don't want to start calling names, but back in the 80s, one person really come to mind, the late Elaine Tyson, who went out in the community. We couldn't register like we do now. We have some forms in the office, and anybody who want to register now can have anybody in this audience to register you, or you can register yourself, as long as we check it and make sure it's sent in to the board of election properly. But then we had to find a certified registrar and hope that they was in the move, and many of them wasn't. And Elaine single-handedly registered over 2,000 people in the community. Let's give God a hand clap of praise for her memory. Now, she was not the only one, but clearly she comes to mind to us now. In a moment, we're going to sing our Negro National, lift every voice and sing. I want to caution you, we did not have our musicians here. We're going to do it by soundtrack. And I already know that soundtrack ain't necessarily key to our starting and stopping. So if we get off, set it off your mind and keep on singing. It's in the program, Lift Every Voice and Sing. It's right here. And once they hit it, I'm going to try to step off. Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring harmony of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise, the listening sound. Let it resound loud as the roaring sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the darkness has brought us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has taught us. Facing the rising sun of a new day begun, let us march on till victory is won. Stormy the road we trod, bill of the casting rod, brought in the day with hope undone had died, yet with a steady beat, have not our weary feet come to the place for which our Father sighed. We have come over the way that our tears have been water. We tread into the battered out of our gloomy past, and now we stand at last where the white gleam of the bright star is cast. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who has brought us thus on our way, thou who has by thy might led us into the light, keep us forever in our path, we pray. Lest our hearts drunk with the wine of the world we forget thee. Cast our thee. Shadow beneath thy hand, may we forever stand true to our God, true to our native land. Give God a hand clap of praise. Amen. One thing I did not include, but I'll be trying to read from this wrinkled program and miss some lines. God bless you. We thank God for that. That is our our history, and we certainly thank God for it. Now we're going to have spoken words from Dr. Kevin Bullock. He's coming.
Everyone. I want to thank the organizers for this evening's event for allowing me to be a part of this program that is obviously full of very significant leaders in our region, in our state, and in our country. So I just want to thank the organizers for allowing me to be a part of this evening. My name is Dr. Daniel Kelvin Bullock, and I'm the Executive Director for Equity Affairs in Durham Public Schools. I'm also a minister in training of sorts at Life Church in Chapel Hill. I am a son to Danny and Wanda Bullock, who are here this evening, brother to Jessica, husband to Dr. Rhonda Taylor Bullock, and father to Zion and Zaire. And again, excited to be here. I reside in Durham, but I was born and raised in Wilson. And I'm always excited to come back to the 252, into the community that raised me and blessed me for so many years. For the spoken word piece I've decided to share today, I'd like to start with a quote from the Fourth Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals regarding North Carolina's 2013 voter ID law. And so this quote will be something that many of us are familiar with, and I felt like it was good to kind of set the context for the poem that I will share this evening. And so back in 2016, the appeals court noted that the North Carolina legislature, quote, requested data on the use by race of a number of voting practices. Then with that data, enacted legislation that restricted voting and registration in 5 different ways, all of which disproportionately affected African Americans. The changes to the voting process they also said the changes to the voting process target African Americans with almost surgical precision and impose cures for problems that did not exist, end quote. This evening, I'd like to speak to you about America's game. I pick up my bat and I take a swing for the fence. Somehow nothing but broken glass grounds out in my residence, but maybe now my cry will be heard. You see, I learned this game from history. We spent centuries in the outfield. We thought the inning was over, but Jim Crow had to bat still. There were a lot of runs scored. And my team, we tried to play catch up, but the rules of the game and fairness never seemed to quite match up. You see, we fought for civil rights so that we could share that diamond, but racism continued to knock them out the park while we were in the back, wall climbing. We fast forward to the 80s and what appeared to be free bases, but that was just a trap for those trying to run in those races. See, of course we were called out. That free base was never safe. Sometimes we were baited to steal, and that's just the chance that we take. Now, I'm not justifying jacking, but all teams are robbing, son. I'm just saying call it fair in this game we begun. So often, when our team gets the chance to bat, we get tossed pitch after pitch, which makes contact with our bodies. And if there's even the question that we might charge the mound, then any force is justified in bringing us down to the ground. We can't let this slide, not with error after error after error. Our team can be stepping up to bunt and people are nervous with terror. Pitchers throw ball after ball just hoping that we'll walk, but too often we don't make it home. I'm calling time out for a talk so we can change the whole game, recreate the whole structure, one where Black lives matter and there's respect for the other. Wow. Change, respect. Are they really on deck? Do the fans in the stands even want to see that? Just check our entertainment and how our team is viewed. Our pitches have to have some curves or at least be screwed. But this fastball has no bad call. It's right in your strike zone. Get off the pine, put it on the line, and maybe you can hike home. The important thing in this sort of dream and this mitt must fit is we may have some short stops and we may have some score drops, but we will not quit. You know, sometimes I think our generation thought the game was over, but we're just entering the stretch. Civil rights, y'all, that might have been the warm-up. We ain't seen nothing yet. And I know there are some people who say we're good. I really see no need to complain. But we can't rest on this quest until we change this game. So my question to each and every one of you is, how will you step up to the plate? Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Bullock. And I just want to say you have blessed us, all of us in here and all who are listening by video in every way. And I want to put in one request. If you find yourself in the Wilson area, and I hope you will, which means you're in the Rocky Mount area, on the third Sunday in the month of January, which is our Martin Luther King weekend, you'll see flyers out here. We will have Martin Luther King celebration here. Our speaker for that occasion will be right here, the pastor of Mount Zion First Baptist Church. And if you can get by here and do that same speech, we will be thankful. God bless you. We appreciate you. All right. God bless you. How overwhelmed I am with the talent and commitment that we have here in our midst. Two guys that I ran around with in the late 60s and early 70s. People couldn't understand why I ran around with them, with me being a Rocky Mount boy and they being from Wilson. I don't know whether it was the donuts and coffee they fed me, but I got hooked on Toby Fitch and G.K. Butterfield. We thank God for Senator Toby Fitch, who's here today. And I thought it not robbery if we would have him have special remarks and then present to us our Congressman today. Now, if you don't want to get up, Toby, we'll get a mic to you. You don't need to come up here because I don't, amen. I got a special way to get up here myself with these legs I got now. So, amen, just take your time. We good. Take your time and come on up and we'll get on. Somebody... All right, somebody assist Richard. Richard don't know what he's doing. All right. He tries, but he don't know. Amen. God, our councilman, he's been out here working and picketing and all that kind of thing. He's probably too tired to even help you, Toby. God bless you. We're going to be recognizing others who are here, but let's give God to all of our elected officials as Toby come. All elected officials, we stand, in fact, while he's coming. All elected officials, please stand, look around. Let's give God a hand clap of praise. Do you have enough room at that, Toby? You can move that thing back, get moved back. Bless your heart.
I'm going to lean up against this thing.
Where? All right. I heard I got the wrong program. Let's get it right. All right.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Reverend Walker, I thank you for the opportunity to the Nash Edgecombe Political Caucus. I thank you for your 40-plus odd years. I've done a lot of speaking in my life. I've never been put behind a curveball as I've been put here today.
All right.
To follow Dr. Bullock is something to have to follow, not that I need to try to compete with him, nor he with me. You see, there's a story about some rabbits. Black rabbits, red rabbits, pink rabbits, green rabbits, old rabbits, fat rabbits, skinny rabbits, and just rabbits that some of you hunters know in a couple of more days it'll be time to put them in the pot. They could not survive. Jim Crowism was killing us. The dogs were hunting us and killing them. The weather was killing them. So an old rabbit called a rabbit convention and said, brothers and sisters, we cannot survive, so we may as well tie our tails together and march off to the sea and drown. Having the respect that the rabbits had for the old rabbit, they did just that. On the way to the ocean, the dogs had never seen so many rabbits. They turned tail and ran. Went a little further. It was so cold, frigid weather, because the rabbits had tied their tails together, there was an awful lot of heat. All the other things that would cause these rabbits to dissipate that happened to them because they united, they were able to overcome. Those of you who are my age are accustomed to singing a song, "We Shall Overcome." Well, I tell you now, sitting for approximately 18 years on the bench as a Superior Court judge, I tell you, we need to stop singing it, and we need to start doing it. Out of that relationship between Wilson County and Edgecombe County, I ended up going to the North Carolina House in 1984. We didn't sing "We Shall Overcome." We did it because Nash, Wilson, and Edgecombe worked together. In 1992, I had the pleasure of drawing the lines for redistricting. Those lines produced the first congressperson that North Carolina had had in 100 years, Eva Clayton. And Eva Clayton was the forerunner to Frank Balance and G.K. Butterfield, Jr. And just as Eva stepped down, Frank stepped down, and now G.K. is stepping down. I really wish that he wouldn't. If y'all could convince him not to, it would be all right with me. You see, people make decisions based off of facts as they are presented to them at that time. We got a very capable district attorney who knows that he doesn't try cases off of innuendo. He tries it based off of facts and evidence, be it circumstantial or direct. And we now are living in a time that there is a playbook existing by the Republicans that have been in existence ever since the conclusion of Reconstruction. And they've been playing out of that playbook ever since. And all of the pieces are now together such that the Republican Party wants to turn back the hands of time, and this is not R. Kelly singing the verses. I have never before seen people so mean-spirited politically that you should not have representation. that you should not be able to participate in the way your government is run? Well, we have a sizable part of this population. And if we don't, when are we? We need to make sure our people understand that census taking is a thing that happens to us. It's biblical. The census was taken when Christ was born. And yet we are people of faith. But the census today determines how much money comes into your community, how many representatives you may have. And so we need to become equal partners in this thing called the government of the United States of America. Some people say, Fitch, what are you going to do? I believe in the court system. I, along with Robert Evans and Quentin Sumner and Antonio Lawrence and G.K. Butterfield, we've been doing this thing in the law now for almost 50 years. Robert, you're getting old. And I'm a little older than you, so I've already gotten old. But I still don't feel no ways tired. We just heard the story about Miss Tyson and the registration of over 2,000 people single-handedly. What is it going to take for us to be equal partners in this election in 2022? It's going to take us doing what we have always done. It's going to take us putting aside our petty differences and making sure that we look at our community first. We cannot overlook anybody, be he the drug user or the wino, because wine costs more when they are doing the taxes than what it costs otherwise. So all of our people have a stake in this thing called the government of the United States of America, and more particularly, the government of North Carolina. So I ask you all, let's rededicate ourselves to lifting each other up. And there again, that is biblical. We should always lift each other up rather than tear each other down. The golden rule is to do to others as you would have them to do to you, not do to others before they do to you. A right hand of fellowship is more important than all the other hands in the world, because everybody wants to know that what? Somebody loves and cares for them. All white folks ain't bad and all black folks ain't good. We just need to identify who our enemies are. Cherish our friends and punish our enemies. And then those who do not believe in that type of theory and work against the total community's good, we need to have conversations with those individuals. That's just a little fact of life. No threats, no promises, just facts. How many people sitting in this audience today who are running or think they're running for an office in this new redistricting plan? Be it the court, be it county commissioners, be it city council. Stand up, let me see how many of you are. You see, these are the people right here who can make a change in the way we all live. I thought I saw a young lady in here who was running for a court position. Yeah, I want you to stand too. Where you come from? You come from Fayetteville, Cumberland County. What are you running for?
The North Carolina Court of Appeals, which is a statewide election. We appreciate your support.
Now, don't go out here and tell no lie and say we endorse somebody. We ain't endorse nobody. What are you, ma'am? You are independent, a Democrat, a Republican? What are you? I am a Democrat. All right. Any Republicans in here running? Then if there's a newspaper in here, let the record show that we gave the same opportunity. Ought to go home and quit work. Robert, you know it ain't bad being retired. That check come every month. Ain't got to send nobody to jail. It come every month at the same time. But just because you getting a little age, don't think that your responsibility is over. You need to continue to work. Because every day somebody's trying to take away from you that you have worked to acquire. So let's do the right thing. Let's get out here. Let's get our neighbors. Let's get our family members involved in this process. And let's stay safe. Let's realize that this thing called COVID and all the variants of it are deadly. It is rapid in our communities, and it will take lives. Now, those are some special words, Pastor, and I hope they didn't fall on deaf ear. But I did all of that to say I have a pleasing task. The task that I have is to introduce to some and present to others a man who has been my friend since before I was born.
All right.
Especially, and that's a hard task for somebody to do, especially when they're not too tall. Mm-hmm. They're short. It's also a hard thing to do when I happen to be older than he is by 6 months. But this young man has been a friend of mine ever since we've known that there was a thing called a friend. Mm-hmm. I don't think that over 75 years we have ever had any crosswords with one another.
All right.
And it wasn't that he probably wasn't upset with me. It was that he knew how to work and to act and to mix in a fashion that never felt to me like he was attacking me, and therefore I never attacked him. I wish we all had a friend like a G.K. Butterfield. He's offered himself for how many years? How many years you been in Congress?
18.
How many?
18,
and he's only 18 years old. Isn't that something?
Right.
But he has worked hard for the citizens of this district. And he's still got a year, so he's still going to work hard for this district. He's a student of a guy called George Henry White. And George Henry White was the last congressman that we had from North Carolina before Eva Clayton went. And he predicted when he left the halls of Congress to the chairman of the committee which he addressed, that Mr. Chairman, like Phoenix, out of the ashes, the black men and black boys and black girls in North Carolina, out of this 2nd Congressional District, the mighty 2nd, will again rise. Live out the true creed of what this country is about, that we all are created equal and that we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. He believes it. He's lived it. He exercised it in the practice of law. It is my pleasure and my distinct honor to introduce to some and present to others the best friend that a man has ever had, Congressman G.K. Butterfield, Jr. Hear ye he, and God bless him and all that he has done. Thank you.
All right, let us stand to receive him. There is one correction that we thank you so very much, my good friend, Senator Toby Fitch. There is one correction here by order of the Congressman. First of all, I want to thank God for the staff person that he assigned to us to help us walk through the whole process. A very young man, member of my congregation. Daniel Wilkins, stand if you will. We thank God for him. All right. However, in spite of Daniel's coaching, the Congressman looked at the program, and that's why we got 2 or 3 programs here. I was working for a draft, and I missed this. And thanks Sister Deborah, Dr. Deborah Allen, where is she, for doing our program. Thank you so much. She's upstairs. Give her a hand. Her husband, the chairman of my part of Diggin, pointed out to me that I arbitrarily missed a person, and that's because I'm operating from a program that never made it to press. And that person, and I'm still looking at it. Where's the new program here? All right. That person is, and Congressman Butterfield made sure this happened. At the very last minute, he looked at the program. He said, "Do you not know you don't have any females on that program?" And we made that correction today, and that's why we're having such a hang-up here. That female is a young lady that's been very active in politics. She's formerly the first vice president of the North Carolina Democratic Party. She's currently a candidate for the Nash County Board of Commission, Gwen Wilkins. She's gonna come now. Let's give her a hand. The Congressman insisted that she gonna speak before he did. Amen.
You know, in this business, you have to be ready to roll with the punches. So I thank you. I give honor to God, Reverend Dr. Thomas L. Walker, and the Edgecombe Nash Political Caucus for bringing us here today. Indeed, I am grateful for your commitment to our community and for staying in this fight. To my friend and Congressman, the Honorable G.K. Butterfield, who over the years has been fighting for justice across our country, across this state. Distinguished guests, public officials, saints and friends, thank you for being here. And Congressman, I want you to know I was up to about 3 o'clock in the morning writing this, but I thank you for this opportunity. I cannot begin to tell you how honored I am to speak to you this afternoon. We come here united by our desire and our dedication to have a life well lived, to be given fair opportunities and chances to show our state and our country what we are capable of accomplishing. Yes, as we enter 2022, the struggle does continue. And if we do not speak on this topic, listen and absorb what Congressman Butterfield has to say, we may be lost again in this year's elections. There are so many in need of health care, so the struggle continues. Social Security recipients received 5.9% raise this year, but the deductible was increased, so part of that raise is gone. The struggle continues. The minimum wage remains at an all-time low, and the struggle continues. There is injustice, disrespect, and persecution all around us, so the struggle continues. Right here in Rocky Mount, we watched the video of a man being beaten with a stick and being called a name I could never call a human being. The struggle continues. Thank you, Reverend Walker and Ebenezer, for opening up your church to the community meetings to address injustices, for opening this sanctuary to everyone and welcoming all of God's children. And I have to say thank you to the Reverend Nehemiah Smith for holding it down at that store the day I went to sign the petition to get rid of it. Congressman, I believe John Lewis said it best, it's time we get into good trouble. You know, when I was 8 years old and growing up in Washington, D.C., I remember watching on our small black and white television the nonviolent protests for civil rights. I watched on that same black and white television the indecencies that took place during these marches and the pandemonium, the tears, and the feelings of hopelessness that ensued when Dr. King was taken from us. I was young and impressionable at that time, but oh, what an impression he made. I remember the determination and perseverance he showed in spite of the danger he faced. He left us a legacy of civil rights and nonviolence, a legacy that Congressman G.K. Butterfield is leaving us in Congress. With so much happening around us, we must prepare for the 2022 elections, midterm elections. We cannot afford to stay home. Our health will be on the ballot, our pocketbooks will be on the ballot, justice will be on the ballot. It is time for us to get into good trouble because our democracy is at stake. In May of this year, we will go to the polls in the midterm elections. We will decide in the primary who we want to represent us in the general election in November, who will be on that ballot in November. We will decide who will represent us from city council to county commissioner, from North Carolina House to the North Carolina Senate, from U.S. Senator to U.S. Congress, because with our distinguished Congressman Butterfield retiring at the end of this year, we must elect someone to fight the battles in the halls of the United States Congress. It is sad to think that while we are working hard to encourage and get out the vote, others are working equally as hard to keep voters at home and make voting more difficult. And yes, Congressman, we need to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. Thank you for your congressional colleagues for your tireless efforts in trying to do so. Ladies and gentlemen, we are holding on by a thin thread in the U.S. Senate. Thank God for Georgia. They showed the world what could be done when voters go to the polls. By them doing so, electing those two candidates, I won't call the name because of the pact, but in electing those two candidates, they gave Vice President Kamala Harris the ability to deliver a tie-breaking vote. Which brings me to this. We cannot leave Uncle Joe out in the cold this year in the midterms. I recall when a young senator by the name of Barack Obama came onto the political arena in 2008, we came out, we showed out. In the primary election that May, people came in wheelchairs, they came on crutches and walkers. They stood out in the rain. College students worked the polls at a fever pitch. But then 2 years after that, we did not give our president the backup he needed to push his agenda through the halls of the U.S. Senate. Many thought all they had to do was elect the president and the work stopped there. Not so. We cannot afford to do that this year. We cannot continue to elect the president and send him into battle without the Army in the U.S. House and the United States Senate to back him up. I must believe we can make history again by electing the first Black female U.S. Senator. I won't call a name again, but you all know who I'm talking about. History has not been on our side. In 2022, this year, we can change the course of that history. We can give a hand up. We can target the American dream for all by electing officials that want to see us all prosper. Save our democracy. Get into some good trouble. Allow justice to roll down like that mighty stream right here in Rocky Mount, in Nash and Edgecombe counties, and that is how we will put the happy in New Year. Thank you, Congressman Butterfield. Thank you, Reverend Walker. Thank you, Nash Edgecombe Political PAC.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It is really my turn. Let me begin by thanking you, Dr. Walker, for your friendship. Thank you for the invitation to come today to share a few words on this very important occasion. And thank you for your friendship. When Dr. Walker says that he bonded with Toby and me some 30 or 40 years ago, I have a very simple explanation. We spoke the same language. He was doing in Rocky Mount what we were doing in Wilson. And so thank you, Dr. Walker, for all that you have meant to so many down through the years. To the elected officials, and there are quite a few of you in the audience, and I dare not call you by name, but thank all of you for all that you do for all of us. I see members of the state senate, Don Davis and Toby, and I see the judges and the city council folk and the sheriff and all of you. Just thank you for coming, and just thank you for your leadership here in this community. Let me especially thank the Edgecombe Nash Political Caucus. I remember when the caucus was first organized. I'm told that it was back in 1980. I knew it was a long time ago, but 1980. I remember when a small group of people came together for a common purpose. I remember the J.O. Thorns and the like. You came together and formed this organization, and you are still alive and well. And so thank you to all of you who support the caucus, and just thank you for your incredible work. Let me also give a shout out to those of you who are watching this by stream. I'm told that this is being streamed all across the country. I didn't believe it at first until I got a text just a minute ago from a friend who lives in Los Angeles. She is originally from Tarboro. Her name is Janice Bryant. And Janice just texted me and told me she has 60 people in her home right now watching this being streamed. So let's give them a hand. But the theme that you have selected today, the struggle continues, is so relevant. You know, the African-American struggle has been a difficult one. We can all agree on that. And African Americans in Rocky Mount, right here in Nash and Edgecombe counties, have been very much a part of that struggle. It is even more fitting that you frame the conversation this evening around the legendary George H. White, who served in Congress more than 100 years ago. There are so many parallels that are taking place today right before our eyes. And you heard Dr. Bullock, you heard Senator Fitch, you've heard others talk about what's happening right now. It's happening right before our eyes. So let's start with George Henry White. The George White story, my friends, is rooted in the presidential election of 1860. Not 1960, 1860. In 1860, slavery was rampant. There were 4 million slaves in the South. In that year, Abraham Lincoln decided he wanted to run for president of the United States. Southern states were very fearful of Lincoln. Lincoln was from Illinois. They were very fearful of Lincoln because they believed and they felt that if Lincoln was elected president, that the first thing he would do would be to end slavery and take away their slaves. And so Southern states vehemently opposed Abraham Lincoln in the presidential election of 1860. But as we all know, Lincoln was elected November of 1860. Immediately, within 5 weeks after Lincoln being elected in 1860, within 5 weeks, 11 Southern states decided to secede from the Union. They believed that Lincoln was not their friend, that Lincoln would come to the South and deprive them of their slaves. They seceded from the Union. They formed their own country. They tried to form their own country. It was called the Confederate States of America. They adopted a constitution, elected a president, a vice president. They even adopted a currency. They stood up a military. They did everything that a country would do in forming a government. And so these 11 Southern states left the Union. The Civil War breaks out, a brutal war between the North and the South. I like to say that it was not a war between the North and the South. It was a war by the South against the North. It was a brutal war. And finally, in 1862, Lincoln was weary. He was distressed. He was distraught about what was taking place on the battlefield. And so he decided that he would do something extraordinary. He would write a document called an Emancipation Proclamation. And so he formed this idea in 1862, and in September of 1862, Lincoln signed a document called the Preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. It wasn't the permanent one, it was the preliminary one. On September 22nd, 1862, Lincoln said to those 11 Southern states, if you do not come back into the Union within 100 days, I am going to use my power to end the system of slavery. The Southern states ignored President Lincoln. They thumbed their nose at President Lincoln and said, we're not going to do it. You don't have the power. You don't have the power to take away our property. These 4 million slaves belong to us, and you're not going to take away our power. Furthermore, you don't have the authority to do it. You are one person. You're not the Congress. You're not the Constitution. You're one man. You cannot take away our property. And so they thumbed their nose at President Lincoln. And finally, Lincoln followed through on his threat. On January 1st of 1863, which was 159 years ago, I counted it this morning, 159 years ago, Lincoln did what he threatened he would do. He issued his Emancipation Proclamation, which basically said that every slave in the 11 Southern states that were in rebellion against the Union were free. I made that distinction because Lincoln felt that he did not have the authority to end slavery in states that were not in rebellion to the Union. Kentucky, Missouri, West Virginia, Maryland, those states were not rebelling against the Union. And so he felt that he did not have the authority. He felt that as commander-in-chief, as the head of the military, as the top military official in this country, since we were at war, he could use his war powers to take the slaves away from their masters. And so that's what happened. Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation basically saying, if you live in those 11 Southern states, you are free. He deployed Union troops into the South to assist him in freeing the slaves. A thought just occurred to me. Toby Fitch's great-grandfather was named William Henry Singleton. Sergeant Singleton, and I want you to Google it when you get home tonight, William Henry Singleton. Sergeant Singleton lived in Newbern, volunteered for the war after the Emancipation Proclamation was issued. Didn't have to do it, but he did it. So finally, it's now 1864, and it's time for re-election. Again, the Southern states vehemently opposed Lincoln.
They could not vote because they had pulled away from the Union. But they did everything within their power to try to find some way to defeat Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln is reelected in November of 1864. And the first thing he did was to say, well, I may not have had the power as president, but we certainly have the power to change the Constitution. And we're going to change the Constitution, and we're going to put to rest any legal argument that I did not have the authority to end slavery. And so on January 31st of 1865, the Congress of the United States passed what we call the 13th Amendment. It's a very powerful amendment. It's one sentence. It says, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction, period. That was the 13th Amendment, and it was passed by the Congress. Well, we all know from civics in high school that Congress can only begin the process of amending the Constitution. In order for it to be final, it has to be ratified by 2/3 of the states. And so it might be 3/4 of the states, I don't recall. But anyway, the 13th Amendment had to be ratified. So after Congress passed the 13th Amendment, the 13th Amendment was then sent to the states, one at a time, to be ratified. The first state was Illinois, which was Lincoln's home state. The 26th state was the state of North Carolina, which was on December 4th of 1865. And the 27th state, which was the requisite number, the 27th state ended up being the state of Georgia. On December 6, 1865, when the state of Georgia ratified the 13th Amendment, legal slavery in America was abolished. 4 million slaves obtained their legal freedom. 4 million. 330,000. I want you to just comprehend that for a minute. 330,000 right here in North Carolina. That's 1/3 of a million. 10,000 in Edgecombe County. 10,000 in Halifax County. 10,000 in Warren County. 4,600 in Nash County. 3,496 in Wilson County. And since I was sitting there, I looked up on my phone how many in Martin County. I see the mayors there from Martin County. The mayors from Martin County, raise your hand. I see you all out there. Thank you. But Martin County, 4,309 people obtained their freedom. You put it all together, that's more than 40,000 African Americans who obtained their freedom when the 13th Amendment was ratified. And so after that, the war comes to an end. Lincoln is assassinated in April of 1865. A new president steps into the Oval Office, Andrew Johnson. But the southern states have now surrendered. And the southern states are saying, we want to come home. We want to come home. We want to come back to the Union. And so here's what the Congress did. Congress said, okay, we're going to let you come back into the Union, but here's the deal. For you to come back, you're going to have to recognize the former slaves as citizens. They're just not your property. They're not subjects. They're not chattel. They are citizens of the United States. And so Congress in 1866 passed the 14th Amendment to the Constitution and sent it around to the states for ratification. The condition was that you had to come back to the Union and you had to approve the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment basically says, and I guess this is one sentence too, all persons born in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. And so state after state after state, the 11 southern states started having constitutional conventions, adopting the 14th Amendment as part of their platform, adopting a state constitution. Edgecombe County had a representative, an African-American representative, to go to the Constitutional Convention. His name was Henry Cherry. And so finally, when North Carolina approved the 14th Amendment, then North Carolina was allowed to come back into the Union on July 4th of 1868. Well, 4 million slaves are free. 4 million slaves are now citizens of the United States. But then the opposition says they might be free, they might be citizens, but they don't have the right to vote. There's nothing here that says that they have the right to vote. And so Congress had to roll up its sleeves again and go to work and amend the Constitution again. So this time was in 1870. Congress passed the 15th Amendment. It was the 13th, the 14th, and now it's the 15th Amendment was passed by the Congress. And that amendment basically says in its one sentence, the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. And so now you've got the Reconstruction Amendments. You've got 4 million African Americans who are in need of Reconstruction. And that's when the whole glorious period of Reconstruction begins. The first thing the former slaves did with the help of whites from the North, the first thing they did was to establish churches. You go out into Edgecombe County and Nash County and you look at the cornerstone of some of our churches. You'll see 1865, 1868, 1871, and I'm still upset with Brother Nehemiah because I missed his 150th anniversary, and we'll make the 151st next year. But anyway, they established churches. But not only did they establish churches, but many of the churches established schools, freedom schools they were called. So the little schoolhouse was attached to the church, and you had whites from the North who came south. You had African Americans who had just a modicum of elementary education going into these one-room schools trying to educate the former slave children. But African American men decided, well, we've got our churches, we've got our little schoolhouses, now it's time for us to vote. African American men took advantage of the right to vote. Oh, did they take advantage? They registered to vote in very large numbers. I've seen some estimates as high as 90%. They registered to vote in large numbers. Women could not vote during those days, whether they were black or white. Women could not vote. It was male suffrage only. But African American males became registered voters, and they participated in every election, not just presidential elections. They participated in every election. And good things began to happen. African Americans started electing black elected officials in counties all across eastern North Carolina. And I don't have time to go into it, but there were black elected officials right here in Edgecombe and Nash counties elected during that period. Then they decided, well, it's time to elect a black Congress member. And so they reached up into Warren County and grabbed a man named John Adams Hyman. And Hyman ran for Congress in 1874, and he won. And then in 1882, a man from Enfield, right up 301, James Edward O'Hara. O'Hara decided after Hyman retired that he would run for Congress, and he did in 1882 and served 2 terms. And then a man from Henderson, from the Oxford area, named Henry Plummer Cheatham, decided he would run in 1888, and Cheatham served in Congress for 4 years. But throughout the South, we're into the 1890s now. Throughout the South in the 1890s, the gains that African Americans achieved were labeled as Negro domination. That's what you read everywhere in the white press, Negro domination. Whites were resentful. They were hostile. Lynchings were taking place all across the South. The news media every day vilified African American leaders. It was called the White Supremacy Campaign. In the face of all of the hatred and bigotry, an African-American man from Tarboro ran for Congress in what was then known as the 2nd Congressional District. George H. White had lived in New Bern. He was a very prominent black lawyer. When he threatened to run for Congress in New Bern, the General Assembly came together and gerrymandered the district and cut him out of the district. But not to be deterred, George White then moved to Tarboro, which was his wife's hometown, and he ran for Congress in 1896. In the face of the white supremacy campaign, George White energized the black vote, and yes, he was elected. And this brother, and I've done a lot of research and a lot of reading, and I am a George White supporter. Almost said scholar, but that's kind of self-serving. But I follow George White and read a lot about him. But this brother went to Washington and began speaking to the despicable lynchings taking place all across the South. He spoke our language, Dr. Walker. He spoke to lynchings. He was a threat. 2 years later, in 1898, Congressman White was reelected, but lynchings continued. A white mob attacked the city of Wilmington and ended the political progress of African Americans in Wilmington. Yes, the Wilmington race riot. White Southerners continued to scream, Negro domination. The KKK continued their reign of terror. It was at that moment, in 1899, right near the turn of the century, that the North Carolina General Assembly began discussing a constitutional amendment, a change to the state constitution that would implement a literacy test and a poll tax. And here's what they debated in Raleigh. And my friends in the legislature know that it probably was not a debate, it was just a conversation because it was already a foregone conclusion what they were going to do. Here's what they passed. Quote, every person presenting himself for registration shall be able to read and write any section of the Constitution in the English language, and before he shall be entitled to vote, he shall have paid on or before the first day of March in the year in which he proposes to vote his poll tax as prescribed by law for the previous year. This was called the literacy test. It was called the poll tax. And so what happened, all of the voters were required to remove themselves from the polls. They were no longer registered voters. They had to come back and re-register. When whites came back to re-register, it was very easy. They were allowed to sign up. When African Americans came back to re-register, they were denied based on what was called the literacy test. And recognizing the impossibility of winning the 1900 congressional election, Congressman White chose to retire from Congress. In his departing speech, and Senator Fitch made reference to it, in his departing speech on January 29th of 1901, here's what Congressman White said, quote, this, Mr. Chairman, is perhaps the Negro's temporary farewell to the American Congress, but let me say, Phoenix-like, he will rise up someday and come again. These parting words are in behalf of an outraged and heartbroken and bruised and bleeding, but God-fearing people, faithful and industrious, loyal people, full of potential force, end of quote. George White left the Congress with these words. 60 years later, I'm jumping 60 years now in the interest of time. You know who's on TV right now? Cowboys, okay? Dennis Hussey, where's Dennis Hussey? I know he's trying to get out of here. Okay. 60 years later, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was one of the leaders of the Civil Rights Movement. As a result of his work, as a result of the blood shed in Birmingham and elsewhere, Congress passed the Civil Rights Bill. We all know about the Civil Rights Bill. It was July of 1964. 5 months later, Dr. King received the Nobel Peace Prize for his leadership on civil rights. King went to Oslo, Norway, to receive this award. When King returned to the United States, he was summoned to the White House by President Lyndon Johnson. President Kennedy had been assassinated. He was summoned to the White House by President Johnson. Johnson said to Dr. King, Dr. King, thank you for the incredible work that you've done on behalf of civil rights. On behalf of a grateful nation, we're thankful for your work. And that's when Dr. King responded and looked directly at President Johnson and said, President Johnson, I thank you for recognizing me. But now, sir, we need a Voting Rights Act. We need a Voting Rights Act. And President Johnson said, don't do that to me. I just used all of my political capital to get you the Civil Rights Bill last year. I cannot go back now to the Congress where I've lost friends over there and ask them to vote for a voting rights bill. Now is not the time. King said, but now is the time. Black people in North Carolina and South Carolina and Georgia and Alabama, Mississippi, the southern states, they are not able to vote because of the literacy tests. Lyndon Johnson said, I understand that. I'm from Texas. I know what you're talking about. But you got to understand it from a political perspective, Dr. King. What you need to understand is that I have taken over from President Kennedy's assassination. I've got to run for re-election. I've got some things staring me in the face. I've got Vietnam to deal with. I've got Khrushchev, and I've got the Cuban Missile crisis that I'm dealing with. I've got in the back of my mind some programs, some anti-poverty programs that I want to bring to the country. I want to bring in something called Medicare. Our senior citizens need health care, and I've got an idea on that. And by coming up with voting rights, it's going to kill any idea of Medicare. Then I want to help poor people with Medicaid. I've got a Medicaid idea in mind, and I want to bring in a program called Medicaid. And I've got some other ideas that I want to implement. But Dr. King, if you make me do a voting rights bill, none of that will happen. I served in the Senate. I know those guys over there on Capitol Hill. And if I go back down there talking about voting rights for Negroes in the South, all of this Medicare, Medicaid idea will never happen. And so Dr. King told him he was disappointed. King left the White House. And John Lewis told me more times than I can imagine, and I believe this to be true. John Lewis told me that King told him that when he got to the door of the Oval Office, Martin King turned around to thank Johnson for the invitation, and Johnson winked his eye, as some Southerners would do, winked his eye and said, make me do it. In other words, make me do it. Put me in a situation where I will have to do what you're asking me to do. And that's when Dr. King went to Selma, Alabama, and started a brand new movement. This wasn't the civil rights movement. This was the voting rights movement. Went to Selma, Alabama, and launched a brand new movement, Selma to Montgomery. And 400 marchers assembled at Brown Chapel Church in Selma on that Sunday afternoon, and they tried to walk to Montgomery. When they got to the Edmund Pettus Bridge, they were met with force, and they were turned around, and some were injured and nearly killed. President Johnson was embarrassed about what had happened in Selma. Johnson picked up the telephone and called the governor of Alabama, George Wallace, and said, look, those Negroes, I don't agree with what they're doing, but you better not put your hands on them. They're going to march again in 3 weeks, and you better leave them alone because they have the right to do what they're doing. 3 weeks later, the marchers reorganized, and this time led by John Lewis, and I miss him every day. John Lewis led that march to the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and as they walked across the bridge, the police officers stood there with their arms folded, daring to interfere with the march. By the time the marchers got to Montgomery, there were 50,000 in number, and they were demanding a voting rights bill. As the marchers were being returned to Selma, some by car, a white lady from Detroit named Viola Luizio had come south to help with the march. She was shuttling some of the marchers back to Selma on her car. And on the countryside, on a country road there in Alabama, she was forced off of the road by the Klan, and she was murdered. Because of that, President Johnson had had enough. He had had enough. He said, I don't care about re-election. I don't care about Medicare, Medicaid, anti-poverty. I don't care about Khrushchev. I don't care about all of these things. We're going to have a voting rights bill. And that's when Lyndon Johnson called a press conference and looked the camera straight in the eye and said that Negroes have a right to vote uninterrupted in this country, and we will have a voting rights bill. And so Johnson then changed his mind and supported a voting rights bill. And finally, on August 6th of 1965, the voting rights bill, after it was a lot of filibustering, the voting rights bill was finally enacted into law. The voting rights bill, and I'm closing with this, the voting rights bill, the Voting Rights Act, has transformed the South. It has transformed Edgecombe and Nash County and Martin County and Wilson County and Warren. It has transformed the South. First, it eliminated the literacy test. So no local county board of elections can require literacy as a condition of voting. Number two, it created what we call Section 2, which gives communities the right to bring a lawsuit if they can prove that their rights, their voting rights are being diluted. It also created a Section 5, which said that the southern states that have a history of discrimination in voting, before they change any laws, they must get approval, pre-clearance we call it, from the Department of Justice. That was the Voting Rights Act. There was a whole lot of other stuff in there, but basically that was the Voting Rights Act. So starting in 1965, we started using the Voting Rights Act, and it has transformed America. Let me give you a local example. Rocky Mount City Council, before 1972, was all white. The city was 40% African American, but the city council was all white. Councilman Joyner. The reason for it was that white voters would not vote for black candidates. And so since there were more white voters in Rocky Mount than black voters, almost by definition, no African American could get elected. In 1972, an African American named George Dudley, one of your predecessors at Mount Zion, was elected to the city council at large. He was my friend, my father's friend, but George Dudley was a weak city councilman out of necessity. I'm not casting aspersions on Reverend Dudley because he did what the political climate required him to do. But he was a weak city councilman because he ran at large and could not be forceful and stand up for the issues that black Rocky Mount cared about. And so some years later, Rocky Mount, what they call it, Rocky Mount on the Rise, they came up with this slogan, Rocky Mount on the Rise, a city on the rise. And they wanted to annex 12 or 15 areas on the other side of 301. They wanted to annex thousands of new white voters into the Rocky Mount limits. And because of that, we filed an objection. When I say we, I mean Legal Defense Fund of the NAACP and Sue Perry Cole right here in Rocky Mount. We joined hands. We filed an objection to the annexations because that was a change in election procedure. And we said it violated Section 5. And guess what? The Department of Justice said to us, you are right. And that's when they called Fred Turnage, who was the mayor at the time, and said, you cannot bring these new people into the city of Rocky Mount because it's going to dilute minority voting strength. And that's when the Rocky Mount City Council said, but you don't understand what we're doing. We're trying to grow the economy. We're trying to create more jobs in Nash County, and you need to leave us alone because we have the right to do this. Justice Department said under the Voting Rights Act, Section 5, you do not have the right. So finally, when Rocky Mount figured out that the federal government was serious about what it was saying, that's when the city attorney in Rocky Mount said, what do we need to do to get your approval? And the answer came back from Washington, well, one thing you can do is to break Rocky Mount up into 7 wards. 7 wards. Some are African American predominantly, some will be white predominantly, but a good balance of wards in Rocky Mount. And the Rocky Mount folks said, you mean that's the only way we can get this thing approved? Yes, that's the only way you can get it approved. So finally, Rocky Mount drew 7 wards. 3 African American heavy wards, 3 white heavy wards, and a swing ward. It was a 3-3-1 system. And now, over the years, you know what has happened over the years. We now have 4 African Americans serving on the Rocky Mount City Council. And it was because of the Voting Rights Act. And I'm so proud of it. Nash County, I'll give you an example under Section 2. That was Section 5, Rocky Mount. Under Section 2, we went over to Nash County. I led this effort. We went over to Nash County, met with some of the local people in Nashville and Spring Hope. They said, look, we can't get a black person elected to the county commissioners in Nash County. We need some help. We see what y'all done over there in Wilson. Can't we get a lawsuit going here in Nash County? And so Toby Fitch and I met with some people there in Nashville, and we filed a lawsuit in Nash County under Section 2. To make a long story short, won the lawsuit. And because of the lawsuit under the Voting Rights Act, Nash County had to go from an at-large system to a district system for electing county commissioners. And that's why you can have a Fred Butterfield. That's why you can have a Gwen Wilkins. That's why you can have a Marvin Arrington. That's why you can have 3 African Americans on your board of county commissioners. And so the Voting Rights Act has worked very well. But on June 25th of 2013, the Supreme Court surprised us. The Supreme Court said you can no longer use Section 5. You cannot use Section 5. It is unenforceable, and they gave some technical reasons why it was unenforceable. And so because of that, we don't have that protection. So now it's time for redistricting, and we need Section 5 now more than ever. The North Carolina legislature handed us a map a few weeks ago that is not only racially gerrymandered, but it is politically gerrymandered. In North Carolina, 50% of voters vote for Democratic candidates for Congress. 50% vote for Republican candidates for Congress. So you would believe that under a 14-member map, 7 would be Democrat districts and 7 would be Republican districts. Not so. What the legislature gave us was a map that will almost guarantee 11 Republicans being elected and 3 Democrats being elected to Congress. And so we are suing. We are in court, and we are challenging the maps, not under the Voting Rights Act, but under some other ideas as well. And that trial, ladies and gentlemen, starts tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock in Raleigh. And it's going to be streamed live on WRAL.com. So if you don't have much to do tomorrow, if you're at home and have time, please watch those proceedings, but they will be taking place. And so I've said a lot today, and so let me just conclude by saying that we must continue the struggle that we started decades ago. What we are seeing now in North Carolina and across the country, what we are seeing now is not new. It's the same medicine in a different bottle. And I was looking around to see if the news reporters in here, and I hope there are, because I want that reported. It's the same medicine in a different bottle. And if we don't rise to meet this challenge, we will feel the effects of voter discrimination for decades to come. It's not just about who is elected to represent you, even though that's important, but it's about the policies that will be handed down to us by Washington and Raleigh. In 2022, we will be electing a member of Congress to represent us in Washington. I will not be on the ballot. We've made that clear. I've made the decision that it's time to pass the baton to a fresh face with fresh ideas who can fight fire with fire. Someone who understands the struggles we have fought, someone who can win the election under whatever map is presented to us by the courts. The first district, my brothers and sisters, must not be represented by someone who doesn't share the viewpoint of the African American community, plain and simple. Don't let that happen. Don't let that happen. Later this year, the Democrats will hold a primary. Someone will be nominated to run against the Republican nominee. The eyes of the nation will be watching the November election here in eastern North Carolina because the majority in the House of Representatives hangs in the balance. Not only is the balance of power in the House in play, but the balance in the Senate is also hanging on by a thread. And you watch the news, you know we have a 50-50 Senate. There will be millions of dollars spent in North Carolina. I didn't say thousands. There are going to be tens of millions of dollars spent in North Carolina to deliver votes to the Republican Senate candidate who does not align himself or herself with progressive interests. It appears that the Democratic nominee for the Senate is certain to be someone who is aligned with our interests. She will be facing a very difficult election, and we must have all hands on deck. I'm requesting each one of you to become obsessed. And you know, we get obsessed by stuff sometimes, you know, in our families, in our church, in our home, church meetings, a little bit every now and then. People become obsessed with stuff. I want you to become obsessed with this. I want you to become obsessed with the 2022 election. Go into your community, to your workplace, your church, your family, and make sure that every eligible person is registered to vote. And after you do that, become a committee of one and make sure that we have a 100% turnout in the 2022 election. Our future depends on it. Much too long. Thank you very much.
My. Can the church say amen? All right, we want to Butterfield, and we need to leave on that note. I just have one or two pointers to give to you. This is going to be a busy challenge. The caucus will be at the front of it. You notice today we did not have an offering. However, there will be persons with baskets near the rear if you want to leave a check, a contribution for the caucus so that we can go forward with our voter registration and voters education. And of course, our Secretary of Treasury is here today, and we will go forward with that. I also want to remind you we will meet again. All right, Congressman?
If I can have a point of personal privilege. It's no secret that Barack Obama and I were good friends. We came to Congress at the same time. When President Obama became president, I would travel with him from time to time, and on one of our trips, I don't know where we were going, but on one of our trips, I had a copy of the Rocky Mount Telegram newspaper in my possession. And I asked President Obama if he would please autograph it, and he did. And I came back and had this document framed, and it's been hanging on my wall now for the last 10 years, and I took it off this week, and it's dated some kind of date. Where's the date? I think his signature is on top of the date. But anyway, it's the Rocky Mount Telegram. It says, "Thank you, Rocky Mount, Barack Obama. Obama wins." And so I want to present this to you in token of our appreciation and our friendship. Thank you.
Thank you so very much on behalf of the caucus, and we will put this, you see how thoughtful our congressman is. We put this on display in such a place where the whole area will be able to, I'm not going to carry it home and put it in a room somewhere. It will be hung out so you can see it, and at such time the caucus see to move it to whatever more public place we would do it. Thank you again. Again, let me just say, you've been so kind to share with us, Representative Senator Toby Fitch has already had the elected people to stand. We're sorry not getting into a whole lot of name and no endorsements today, but I do want to say that the caucus will be having very shortly Meet the Candidate Forum, and you have an opportunity to come and to share your candidacy and your aims. Until then, we thank you so very much. And of course, to the members of Ebenezer, we know this, this event sort of crowded this day. We've had 3 services, but don't forget there is a drop box outside, amen. So you can drop forward your intentions. God bless you. Will you stand, please? We are so thankful for all of you. And if we fail to recognize anybody, we recognize everybody. And we're trying to keep in step with the wishes of our Congressman. Let's give him another hand. Again, we want to remind you, for a point of special privilege, the next high note from this pulpit will be the Martin Luther King celebration, the 3rd Sunday in January. And we have secured as our speakers, the deacons are in charge of this service, the Reverend Dr. Nehemiah Smith. Give him a hand. And he will be speaking. He will have with him the Mother Church, the Mount Zion First Baptist Church. Let's look forward to that. All minds being clear, let's look to the Lord. Now may the peace of God, which passes all understanding, keep your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. And all who believe said amen. Amen. Somebody been nugging my coat. I'm not a great football fan, but they tell me that something is going on TV. If we don't let y'all out of here, all of you going to leave. All right, thank you very much.